Hello, this is Rabbi Mark at Edgware and Hendon Reformed Synagogue, and we're about to have our live interview with Jeremy Leigh, who is currently sitting in Jerusalem. I'm not actually sitting in Jerusalem. I am, in fact, sitting in a room with a very boring white background, but I thought this would be a nicer one. This is the Blaustein Hall at the top of Hebrew Union College and the Merkaz Shimshon, the centre of World Union for Progressive Judaism in Jerusalem. Just thought it looked a bit nicer than a very boring white background, and at times it will disappear and it will get white again at points when we're going to show some lovely things. We're going to begin in about 2 minutes or so, I hope that you're coming in to join us. One thing that Jeremy needs to be aware of, especially because we know that his mum Sonia is going to be trying to watch, is that he'll actually only appear 2 minutes after he's spoken, because there's a 2-minute delay built into this to make sure if anything goes horribly wrong, we can deal with it and cut off the link. But there's a good 2-minute delay or so. So if you're getting messages from Edgware, Jeremy, they will in fact be coming 2 minutes later than you're speaking. So you'll see how you go. Okay, we're nearly ready to begin. Again, I'm just going to wait for 1 minute or so to do so to make sure that this link has caught up. So we're just about ready to begin with Jeremy. I'm going to bring him up onto the screen so you can all see him. And there he is in an apartment in Jerusalem. We'll hear more about that in a few moments. But what I'm now going to do is let's get ourselves started. So it's a total pleasure for me to have Jeremy with me. We've kind of known each other on and off like you do in Jewish youth world for about, well, I say we're both still Jewish youths, honestly, for a good 30 years or so. But Jeremy now is so well known among the progressive Jewish world, and actually broader than that, as the guide to Jewish journeys all around the world. And he takes trips to all kinds of places. We may hear a little bit about that today. Jeremy is also an educator, and if you're ever in Jerusalem and get the chance to go around with Jeremy, you really learn some amazing things. I had a fantastic experience a little while ago on the World Union for Progressive Judaism conference, where Jeremy took us to understand Jerusalem as a centre of three faiths, which included being on the roof of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and seeing the Ethiopian village there. Quite amazing. I'd never have known it was there. Jeremy is a teacher at Hebrew Union College and many other places in Israel. And of course, one more thing, Jeremy is the son of Rabbi Michael Leigh, Zichrono Livracha, and also the son of Sonia Leigh, who is always in the 13th row towards the back, left-hand side on Shabbat morning. And Sonia, we can't wait until you're back there again. So Jeremy, let me now hand over to you. Now, as we go, if there's any questions you would like to ask Jeremy, then please do email them to me, rabbi.mark@ehrs.uk, rabbi.mark@ehrs.uk, and I'll have the chance to put them through to Jeremy when he's a little bit later. I won't say when he's finished talking because I want to hear him. So let me now hand you over to Jeremy and look forward to hearing from him.
We are muted now. Hi. Well, hello. Hi, everybody. This is. I have to say, I've in this new reality that we're all living in of doing sort of Zoom conversations and virtual relationships, and so I've done teaching to my students who are dotted from east to west coast of the United States, have all gone home, and various other bits and pieces. But this one is a little bit special, I have to say, because of when I got the email the other day from Rabbi Emily asking if I would participate. Of course, the instinctive thing is yes. This is I'm a son of the community, and I may not have been there very often for the last 30 odd years, but Edgware's I don't know. Edgware's always in my soul. It's where I grew up, and as Rabbi Mark just said, it's where my mum and dad, whatever, are pillars of one way or another. So the briefest little piece of biography, because which is relevant here, which is that I grew up in Edgware, and studied in the UK and in Israel, but I moved to Israel 28 years ago, and I've been living here in Jerusalem ever since. My wife is from Manchester. My 3 children are born here. I'm going to talk about a little bit about them in a second. But the thing that the topic of the conversation is really about how, again, it's an interesting way of putting it, how are Israelis or Israel dealing or with the challenges of coronavirus and all that it entails. And that, for me at least, begs all sorts of questions, which I'm sure history books will be written to talk about, which is how do different societies have responded in different kind of ways. And here, in a more specific niche way, which is that we'll all learn about and we're all seeing firsthand, is how do different Jewish communities or different sub-communities within larger states, how are they all coping? And what does it say about the characteristics of that particular place? So in the context of Israel, what are we seeing about who we are and how we're behaving? 2 maybe introductory comments that are worth pointing out. One is that Israel went into lockdown a little bit early. The travel restrictions were imposed much quicker. I wouldn't say the last plane in, but I was at my nephew's bar mitzvah in Cambridge with my mum and the rest of my family. Although not my family from here, they were worried about they would have to be quarantined if they got to. But but as soon as I got back, the whole country was in quarantine. That was a month ago. So we're all sort of not supposed to go more than initially 100 meters and then 10 meters from our houses. As of today, we're allowed to walk, back to the 100 meters. So as a result, Israel has been, like all societies are, in that environment of being a national society, but it being experienced from the microcosm of this very, very personal, intimate kind of space. And the question that brings up is, how does a country kind of almost see itself in this kind of extreme situation? So I'll talk about that. TV, obviously, is one of the critical media for seeing a reflection back of ourselves. But I think the one thing that is true to say is that Israel is a highly sociable society, very much outdoors, as those who visited will know, and very physical in terms of, it's not just shaking hands, it's hugging, it's kissing, whatever, in public society, and we're Middle Eastern. I mean, we may have our origins all other places, but Middle Eastern in every sense of the word. So it's been a bit of a strain, I think, for everyone to learn the new rules of distancing. It seems totally counterintuitive. But the main thing that I wanted to say, which I think is probably the reason for sharing this, is that there was initially, I think, quite a lot of conversation about what makes Israeli response slightly different. Is not that no one's used to dealing with a pandemic, but what we are used to dealing with are national emergencies. And in national emergencies, you behave in certain kind of ways. It's in the memory of everyone in my family of at some point having to go to a shelter, for instance. And certainly those that remember the Intifada in the early 2000s of not going out because everyone was frightened of buses blowing up. And obviously one can go further and further back in Israeli history. So the sense of living with emergency and living with special situation, I mean, obviously in Britain it's there from the Blitz or from the Second World War, but I think here it somehow resonates. And that, I think, it's just an interesting one. It means that there's a kind of an instinctive ability to somehow kind of A, accept, and B, to put in place some of those resilience strategies of how do we find each other, how do we connect with each other. So I don't know, I think this is, Mark, I think this is what you'd like me to maybe kind of direct towards. But, what I wanted to do was pick out a few of the examples where I think it's interesting. I think the first and foremost thing, and it's the one which is, it's both universal and it's particular. In other words, all societies are looking at themselves through the prism of this kind of this period. And one is, how do we actually see each other? And the TV, as in all countries that have TV, becomes the national community. But I think the question is, and this is, again, I don't want to sound overly sort of push it too far, but this is the stuff that I teach at HUC, talking about Israel studies. But one of the questions I think we always ask is, what is the proximity between the citizens and the country? And, you can measure that. In Britain, it's the proximity between here and here. In America, it's even, I'll lose the screen. And, is there a sense of proximity between individual citizens and the country that they live in? And I think the answer is, in most cases, yes. But when you see the radical opposites, which is no, which is maybe the ultra-Orthodox community, Palestinian, Israeli, Arab-Israeli society, how does that cope when in some way we're being pulled together and we're trying to connect with each other? So I think the first and most obvious thing to say is that Israel has a very high quotient of what is called social capital, that network of relationships that pull people together and make us able to kind of look after each other. So really within the first couple of days of the lockdown, almost all municipalities and neighborhoods set up help programs in order to make sure that people who are on their own, and particularly those who are less able, more vulnerable, would have access to food and medicine and so on and so forth. And in the neighborhood that I live in, which, in Amor Natziv, it's in the southern part of Jerusalem, I mean, I'm saying this without sort of categorical research, but we are one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the country, in the sense that because we're right on the Green Line, on the Israeli side of the Green Line, we have a lot of Palestinians from East Jerusalem who are always in the area of the supermarket, the post office, and the bank. And we have an absorption center of new immigrants down in the valley. So pretty much lots and lots of Russian speakers and Ethiopians going back for generations of the new immigrants. And there's a kind of a slightly more wealthy area which mysteriously seems to be inhabited by English-speaking Israelis, but it's a lower middle class area, and therefore has all the kind of the strata of Israel. And in that close microcosm, all the various subgroups of Israeli society, here we are. And what seems interesting is how quickly the community managed to kind of get itself together to look after each other, irrespective of any particular identity or ethnicity. And I think there is some element of sort of feeling good. I think the same thing have I observed from the UK, watching the BBC, people clapping the NHS workers, which is an incredible thing to watch, and to applaud all the people who are there to look after us. It becomes a moment when you kind of want to get drawn in. And when you want to get drawn in, who are you really getting drawn into? So on the one hand, it's the people who really are looking after us. On the other hand, it's also our neighbors. But if our neighbors are a little bit different to us, and in Israel, we may be very tight together in our Jewishness or Israeliness or whatever, but it also pushes apart. There's lots of divisions here. So it's been quite a heartening kind of experience, I think, to see Israelis kind of finding each other so clearly. Now, if we go, maybe just push it a little bit further, maybe to reference a couple of core bits. One is a personal family story, and the other one is a little piece of video I wanted to share with you. My middle daughter, I have three daughters, one's 23, almost 24, one's in the army, she's 22, and my youngest daughter is having her 18th birthday in 2 weeks' time, and is absolutely petrified that the closure won't be lifted and there'll be no party. So anyway, but my middle daughter is in the army. She's an officer in the education corps of the IDF, and normally she trains soldiers who come from disadvantaged backgrounds as a kind of an entry point into the army. However, they're on pause at the moment, and the army has been drafted into the national effort. And the reason why I think it does have a distinctive element, a distinctive story to it, which I think I'm guessing should be clear to anyone that's listening or watching, is that the IDF has a kind of an image in people's minds working very differently depending on who you are. On the one hand, it might be heroic soldiers, in days of yore in battles, or it might be oppressors if you're Palestinian and you kind of don't relate to the Israeli army in such cheerful and optimistic, nationalistic, patriotic terms. Or it's a kind of an annoying thing that you have to do service to when you're 18, or it's the thing that you don't want to go anywhere near if you're ultra-Orthodox. And except that the IDF is the central institution of Israeli sort of public life and kind of bridges between civil society and national society. So the fact that the army is drafted in, we're talking about an army of hundreds of thousands of people who are both, one at the same time, guarding the borders of the country still, but are able to, and this is, I guess, where Ella, my middle daughter, was able to do. She got very quickly, in a couple of days, retrained to have a driver's license. She has a driver's license, but a military driver's license, to drive medical personnel around the country, to deliver food to families of health workers, in a way. And the chief of staff, Aviv Kochavi, sent a message out before Pesach to all soldiers in the IDF, saying that our national mission has actually been changed temporarily. Until now, we see our primary focus of the IDF is to protect the country at a time of war and to make sure that everyone is physically safe from the enemy. But because the enemy is different, it's a virus, it's a pandemic, now we are at the service of the country to do whatever the country requires of us. And that's it's very uplifting. And it has created scenes which maybe would seem a little bit surprising. So actually, you know what? Having said, I think, Mark, I want to ask you to put up the little thing of the Yiddish there. Maybe is that possible to get up?
Yeah. Yes, that's
What I
absolutely
want,
fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show it on the screen where I am. To do that, I need to disappear from Jerusalem, return to Finchley, slightly reluctantly, I have to tell you, because as you'll see, it's a very boring background, but there we are. And then that will now enable me to put this up onto the screen. So just one moment, please, and we will get there. Do remember, by the way, if anything that Jeremy's saying is making you feel, oh, well, there's a question I'd love to ask, just email me at rabbi.mark@ehrs.uk. And here we go. So let's see if I can get it nice and big. There we go.
So I'll explain what Rabbi Mark is putting up on the screen. I mean, it's really just sort of the symbol of letting you know this, but this is what flashed up onto our screens on the TV the other day. And it's a guide for IDF soldiers who are going to ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods in Bnei Brak and Mea Shearim, where the language is Yiddish, to try and do their job, to try and explain to ultra-Orthodox Jews that they need to stay indoors and if they need help and so on and so forth. But because the language of the country is Hebrew, and because there is an antagonism between the ultra-Orthodox community, again, not everybody, but most people, with the idea of the IDF, because Haredi or ultra-Orthodox men do not serve in the army or get a draft exemption, there's a lot of hostility. And very often, I mean, soldiers will, feel slightly frightened or nervous about going into ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods. And here they are now going into those neighborhoods to try and protect people and to say, we're here to look after you. Now, the problem is, and that's really to explain what I think Rabbi Mark is showing up, which is what I'd sent him, which is that there's a language barrier. Hebrew may be the language of our country, but Yiddish is the language of the street in Mea Shearim and Bnei Brak and so on. And so this is a series of it's a translation. It's got the words in Hebrew on one side, and then it's got it in Yiddish, and then there's a transliteration onto the other side. Is how do you say hi? I'm from the IDF in Yiddish. I can't say it. Mark, feel free to take it down if you want. But I'll just say that this I think it caught my imagination, because it seems that in this very sad situation, something dramatic has happened, and we'll all be, as we all will, the world over, be intrigued to see what the long-lasting effect of living through this period will be. Soldiers who are regularly, insulted and disregarded and abused, and in some cases, stones thrown at, in some by the radicals, by the way. Absolutely, very important to stress. Not all ultra-Orthodox Jews behave in the same way or think the same way, in the same way that none of us all think the same way. But certainly this sort of public antipathy or, and discomfort with IDF soldiers suddenly appearing as being the role of saviors, being thanked very emotionally and very vociferously by ultra-Orthodox Jews in the streets and the apartments. I mean, really going right into people's cramped apartments, delivering food packages to ultra-Orthodox Jews. And that, I think, for me, is a fascinating moment, which is both personal, it's communal, and it's also national. It's a distinctively Israeli story of seeing two very, very disparate parts of society kind of finding each other. I will be really intrigued to see whether the sort of, in a way, sort of the language, the slightly angrier language against the soldiers in the ultra-Orthodox community will change after this is over. So having said that, last thing, maybe one other example is, there's more to say, but maybe another thing to look at is this sense of national community. So the entertainment industry has turned itself over to basically keep morale up, and lots and lots of examples through history, not just in Israel by any means, and that's meant a number of things. Famous artists all doing free concerts on the TV every evening at 10 or 10:30. People that I would otherwise pay a fortune to go and see are performing live and for nothing on TV, which is wonderful. And then the next level out is taking musicians onto the streets and performing, because everyone's in lockdown, and performing. So the other day we had this slightly surreal moment, because we're very disappointed. The band that I wanted to hear, Hatikva Shesh, were playing 3 streets down from us, and but they didn't make it to our street. But nonetheless, this guy showed up with a guitar and an amplifier and a speaker and put himself across the road. And as I say, I live in it's a sort of a low middle class area. Across the road is a a retirement home mainly of Jews from the former Soviet Union, and started playing. And of course, again, I don't want to sort of overanalyze, but it is important to say that the question of, well, what would be the repertoire? What would we all be singing from our balconies? It would have to be things that everyone recognized. So we started off with some Pesach songs, Simcha Rabba B'Gia Pesach Ba, and then we got on to some other kind of other pieces. And then there was this song which was released last year for Independence Day, which came, again, quite symbolically. It was released just after the first of our many elections, where the country was feeling very divided. And then this song was produced, which really sort of, which has stuck in the Israeli imagination. It's very popular, and it's all about how we are all together. So that started playing. And at that point, I will say that my children may be, not children, they may be in their 20s and late teens, but it was a very emotional moment. So I recorded a little bit, and I thought I would share because there's a few things to talk about. So maybe, Mark, if you want to put that up.
So we don't know what the sound quality is going to sound like this way, but I'm going to put it on full screen so that you can really see it. And let's see how we go.
Okay, I think we could probably pause it there. Thank you. That's my mum. If you're watching, you'll recognize those people. So it's a very beautiful song. I mean, the core line is Shevet Achim V'Achayot, we are a tribe of brothers and sisters. And it's full of patriotism, but in a very soft patriotism, non-political type of patriotism. And it really is a song all about unity, and actually, which is lost there. And I'll happily send the link if anybody wants to watch it. But it's in the original version, it's musicians from every background, Arab, Jewish, Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, Sephardi, Russian-speaking, Ethiopian. It's a beautiful kind of patchwork of the of Israeli public life, and so the song has a symbolism. And so the question is, singing that song at a moment where everyone is both incredibly physically divided, but as I think we're all kind of experiencing, and certainly your presence here and the initiative of the synagogue to do this is that we may be physically isolated from each other, but actually socially and emotionally, we're incredibly connected to each other. And so it was a very uplifting moment. It's the same. It began as clapping for health workers, but then it grew to being various things, and then where we're using our balconies to be in the public domain, if you want. I will just say, by the way, the unfortunate video just didn't come out properly, but on Pesach night, on Leila Seder, on the other night, there was an arrangement that everyone should go onto their balcony at 8:30 to sing Manishtana. And it works differently in different parts of the country, depending on the nature of your neighborhood and so on. So we went out at 8:30, and there is something, I cannot even say just how moving it was, is to hear the sort of Manishtana, drifting across the neighborhood. I mean, everyone at different verses, but whatever, somehow it all being there, and of course being played out on TV screens afterwards. It's a sign of national unity. And again, as I say, I don't think it's distinctive. I think it's singular. Every country has its own version of it. And for me, it's very uplifting. I mean, maybe without sort of retreating into sort of overly gushing, maybe sort of false patriotism. This is a country which is, in so many ways incredibly divided, and on the other hand, underneath the divisions, there's incredible potential for pulling together. And equivalence, by the way, which certainly I think it's fair to say that the number of people who will be playing music, electricity on Pesach, is limited to those who are not Orthodox. But there have been lots of other parallel things where people, for instance, have gone onto balconies in order to be able to pray 3 times a day, and where you need to be in a minyan, and trying to work out what does a minyan mean. So can people in nicer neighborhoods who've got back gardens can sort of sing loudly, and people are less nice who are living in apartments from balconies. But the idea of what is a minyan, what is a kind of a congregation of people coming together. So lots and lots of these kind of examples. And I think in all cases, I think it's fair to say that they ignore all the nuanced differences between us and find a greater sense of unity. Now I'm going to just keep talking, but I don't want to just pause and just say, Mark, if there's any particular questions that you want to kind of to sharpen it or focus it, then feel free. Otherwise, I'll just keep going with the.
Yes, Jeremy, I think one question I'd like to ask on behalf of all of us is about it's such a big issue in Britain about the health service, its capacity to cope, its ability to deal with things. And our community, as you may be aware, I mean, we have suffered already 9 deaths from COVID-19, which is just extraordinary. So there is a real kind of feeling about, can we cope? What's the situation in Israel with the health service and the ability to cope with what's going on now, and thoughts about what might happen for the future? We've also heard, of course, of the health minister and some of the crazy things he's been saying, but let me put that back to you.
Yes, well, just in case nobody got the reference, the health minister is a slightly uncomfortable. It's an awkward position because he's a Gerach Hasid. He comes from one of the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox parties, and there's nothing that should stop someone coming who's Haredi ultra-Orthodox from being the health minister. But nonetheless, he hasn't performed his job particularly well. So because there's generally quite a lot of tension and antipathy, I think, towards the ultra-Orthodox community, it's a slightly awkward thing to make sure that it doesn't tip into prejudice against ultra-Orthodox Jews. But on the other hand, the health minister has not been doing great. And of course, what antagonized it, which I think probably is what you were referring to, of the various things he said, is that, we'll get through this, and anyway, the Messiah might come, which is very helpful if you want to go down that path. But so far, no evidence that the Messiah appears to be coming. But I think the general question about the health service, we have socialized medicine. We don't have a system quite as elaborate as the NHS, but we're not a privatized system either. And the health system, so in other words, we all pay for health through our taxes. But the health system has held up. And the reason the health system is held up, I think, is because the low number of the relative per head of the population, lower numbers of infections and fatalities. Today, the number pipped over 10,000, but that's 10,000 in a population of 9 million. So it's big, but and the number of deaths is just coming up to 90. Which is, again, in numerical terms, very small compared to lots of other countries, but nonetheless tragic in every situation. But the health service, had we not locked down as quick as we had, then the rate of infection would have been much higher, and the health service probably would have crashed. So it's holding together. Israel is strong on, has been okay on respirators and intensive care wards up till now. But I think the argument is that, if we stayed on the really steep trajectory, it would have reached breaking point, and we would have scenes such as you've seen in other parts of the world. There is an interesting story, and again, I mean, it's just annoying because it's so classically Israeli, and why we just can't do things normally. Like, I don't know if there is a normally like a normal country, but just have our health system set up to cope. I mean, statistically, we were not set up to. We were not there. We were not in a good position. The ratio of population to beds in ICU units and hospitals in general is not great. And there's already talk. I mean, I haven't related to the political side of the way the Israeli reaction is, because we don't have a government either. But there's certainly a sense that there'll be a commission of investigation waiting to happen to see why we were not more prepared. So we've been spared the worst, probably because of swift action to keep lower rates of infection. But within that, by the way, it is interesting because the big pockets of infection have been much closer towards, I mean, logically like everywhere in cities, but it has been much more closely connected to the ultra-Orthodox community, partly economically because much more tied together. A lot more resistant to being involved with the state and so many other things. So low rates of reporting very early on. In Jerusalem, 75% of all people who have started with the virus and contracted COVID-19 have come from the ultra-Orthodox community. What's interesting, by the way, I'm sort of mixing a couple of things in here just to kind of, I suppose, to kind of bring the story out, but the rate of infection in the Arab sector is relatively low. And some people see it's good. Of course, it's good. What's bad is that it suggests a lower point of contact between Jewish and Arab society, which is not good. We would like to have a more socially integrated. I would like to have a more socially integrated society. So that is interesting. One other thing which is worth putting out, and this I'm sure is part of every country has got a story on, 40% of health workers come from the Arab sector inside Israel. But the Arab population in Israel represents 22% of the population. And depending on which area you go into, it's even much, much larger. Something 75% of all pharmacists in the country are Palestinian Israeli. And when you look at the nursing staff, it's way more than 40%. So in all the kind of the crunchy, difficult, slightly unpleasant political, jockeying for position in post-election period, one of the things which one of the important Arab politicians said is, don't turn against us. You may think that we're not part of your society, but we are. We also look after you, and we're not looking for anything special, but just turn down the volume on the racism because you rely on us in the same way that we rely on you for other things. So the health service has survived, is okay, but I think we were just saved by some early planning. But in the long run, it's I think I'm hoping like the NHS is that there will be lessons learned.
Thank you, Jeremy. Something I just love to share with everybody is there are 53 devices tuned into this talk, which means there's probably about 80 to 100 who are with you at the moment, Jeremy. And I did have one comment. He used to have long hair. What happened? Sorry.
That's the danger of going back to your home community where you grew up. Yeah, sorry.
I want to reiterate.
It's changed colour as well.
I want to reiterate to all 53 of you that I'd love to put your questions to Jeremy and just email them to rabbi.mark@ehrs.uk. That's rabbi.mark@ehrs.uk. Another question I've had that I'd love to ask you is around the social capital you were speaking about. You've spoken about that in a very moving way in various different things, the Manishtana, the people playing music in the streets, etc. Beautiful. To whom is this social capital extending? Is it making a difference to relationships, Jew to Arab, the guys who live in South Tel Aviv, those who are recent immigrants to Israel, those who are perhaps undocumented migrants? What's going on with those parts of Israeli society that sometimes feel rather marginalized?
You said that in a very nice and delicate kind of way. I could be a lot harder. So we would need to take them one by one because, and I felt, I think rightly didn't fall into the trap of, but the community it's easiest to talk about are the ultra-Orthodox, who, by the way, are also in a strange way a marginalized community. They don't fit the national narrative, and they are the group that is the second from the bottom up in terms of poverty statistics. So and the worst housing conditions. But they sort of connect in a way because their population is very large, and politically because they're a little bit more powerful. Who else are we talking about? Palestinian, Arab citizens of Israel, or Israeli Arabs, whichever terminology one prefers, have been, relatively speaking, have fared better than Jewish society, as I think I mentioned before. And the social capital that extends, again, similarly has operated very well within. Again, all countries, all societies measure this question of how tight are the networks. If you want to put it, this is sort of a model which I use for teaching, which is, if you imagine the difference between centripetal and centrifugal forces, what is the greater force in your society? The forces that pull people together or the forces that pull people apart? And that works for countries. I mean, you could ask that for the UK. Are the forces that pull people apart greater than the forces that pull people together? And in Israel, nationally, it feels like we pull together, but we pull together, and I think this is the undercurrent of the question, which I would go with, which is that sort of somewhat selectively. There are always the outsider groups, the other. So specifically, for instance, there was a very painful piece in the newspaper, which thankfully was, which was from Bedouin, from the Bedouin community in Rahat. Rahat is a sort of a conglomeration of Bedouin sub-communities, a sort of a Bedouin city, but complicated because Bedouin and nomadic, which said that all this talk of testing centres and so on and so forth, we haven't seen any of it. Now, luckily, we haven't had any infections either, but that's, you don't want to wait for the infections to arrive. And that, I think, is, and I think, again, if I may say, I think, so many situations in life where there's the thing that happens, but the thing is a magnifier for all the other currents and undercurrents. So it's a magnifier for the divisions that exist in our society. I spoke before, you're right to sort of pull us into this. I can happily wax lyrical about how it's exposed all our sort of our interconnectedness, but it's also exposed the separateness. So specifically, by the way, so that was Bedouin, who are within the Arab society are also the least connected. In the central part of the country, it's a lot more connected, and there are testing centres, and again, a little bit of catching up. Again, some people have argued it's because the public health officials were worried that an outbreak in the Arab sector would be much harder to contain, so therefore got in quick to try and do testing and spread the information. So it's been relatively successful, which has led people to say, it's good that you're showing up now, but why don't you show up normally? Things that one, I think, legitimately expect on other occasions. And then you mentioned the most painful of all, which is, again, the phrase I was going to use would be asylum seekers, which are, Israel has a population of, again, the numbers have gone up and down, but sort of in the region of 35,000 asylum seekers, mainly from Eritrea, South Sudan, and Darfur. Who, at least the current government, before we get a new government, has been, I don't mind being blunt and political, I think absolutely awful and un-Jewish and outrageous in the way that they've dealt with them, which is to try and find people who've come to our country seeking asylum from terrible situations around the world and have met an incredibly unfriendly official response. Very friendly from civil society, by the way, very friendly from civil society, lots of activist groups working for asylum seekers from Africa. And they have, very, again, late on in the day, the government sort of acknowledged, the health service says, I suppose we're going to have to look after them as well and pay them some of the taxes that they've earned and have been kept back by the government, pay them. Now, again, I want to say, again, sort of in this mix between national and civil, between top down and bottom up. Bottom up, as a family, as my shul, I belong to Kol Shema in South Jerusalem, we're very, very involved in that as a particular struggle, as a campaign and so on. And very, very quickly, there was lobbying and there was a lot of checking in and fundraising to make sure the most vulnerable groups, particularly non-Jewish, non-Israeli, and but also traumatized in all sorts of other ways, should be looked after. So it hasn't been worse than normal, but it wasn't great to start off with. Thankfully, civil society, I think, is there. And that, for me, it's a twist on the idea of social capital, I think.
Thank you.
I feel obliged. I ought to mention one thing, because in talking about national society, it's very hard not to, and it's very much sort of, it's sort of the oddity. I don't know what this would have looked like in the UK, but if you'd gone through this, the other side of an election, we've had an election, we've had 3 elections. We were enjoying them so much we were getting ready for the 4th. We may still be having a 4th, in which case tune in and watch the last sort of episode in this series. But we don't have a government, and the backdrop to quite a lot of distinctively Israeli kind of conversation is, how is the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faring up? How is the Defense Minister Naftali Bennett, who comes from one of the more radical right-wing parties, faring up? And the one thing which I really wanted to say, and I wanted to make sure we got it in there, is I don't know how everybody is thinking. If everyone is thinking very micro, and how much everyone wants to think macro. I know, again, in very emotional ways. I'm watching the way in which the country has responded to the hospitalisation of the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and also the words from the Queen last week. These are national figures. So every country looks at their national figures, and who have we looked to see our national figures kind of helping us? And what for me it says is something about the nature of leadership. Now, what am I really saying is that I think that when we come through all of this, we will look to who our leaders were. Again, I'm saying this not to make anyone feel uncomfortable, but I think our religious leaders and our faith communities all the way across the country, we will see them as being people who really come to lead us in the way that they're supposed to lead us. It's a fascinating thing seeing my students. I teach at HUC for trainee rabbis, looking at their future careers and saying, am I equipped? Would I be equipped to deal with this? So what is the sense of responsibility as being a Jewish leader? But the point that I wanted to say is this, is that the person who fought the election against Benjamin Netanyahu was former Chief of Staff Benny Gantz, who has committed himself to doing everything he can to unseat our Prime Minister, who's been indicted for corruption charges and fraud and breach of trust. And he broke everyone's heart about 2 weeks ago when he went on television and said, you know what, I'm going to go into a national unity government with the very person I've been trying to unseat. But at the same time, he said, I feel a sense of national responsibility. And because of what's going on at the moment, I would want there to be a government of national emergency, and in which we can acknowledge all of our political differences, and we're going to put them aside because we have greater things that are challenging us. And there are many people who I think say that this was a foolish move. I have to say I'm in admiration of him, because I think he may have committed political suicide, but I admire somebody who is willing to step up to the plate and say, I am aware of the political ramifications, but I, as an opposition leader, am willing to stand with the Prime Minister who I've been fighting against for the purpose of trying to make sure that we come through this crisis well. It's a very distinctive. Now, and I just may circle back to one other thing, and people have been asking themselves, why did Benny Gantz do this? And the answer is, because he was the chief of staff, and the notion of national service is very much in his blood. That's the only thing he really understands is serving the nation. I mean, I know it sounds very big, but anyway. So for me, there is a bit of politics floating away around in the backdrop to this from an Israeli point of view. So one should at least acknowledge that.
Thank you, Jeremy. Now we're coming to our last 5 minutes. Another question to ask you in a moment. But one thing, if it's at all possible, and I know you said to me that although it's beautifully sunny here in England, apparently it's pouring with rain in Jerusalem.
It is.
But if it's possible to have a look out of your window to really feel we're there, that would be wonderful.
Pleasure.
To be able
that will require me to stand up and open the window. Hold on 1 second. So I'm in my daughter's bedroom, but she has a great view out into the neighbourhood. So. Here we're getting live from.
Here we go.
So I will just say, by the way, not to go into sort of whatever guiding mode or travel mode, but I'll just say, welcome to Armon Hatziv. It's a neighbour on the south of Jerusalem. I'll just say the way that the camera is probably looking, Bethlehem is about 5 miles away in that direction, and the West Bank is about 20. So anyway, there's and the scene of the balcony music was just over
there. Thank you so much, Jeremy. That's really lovely. It means a lot to us, I think, to have that sense of connection that you're bringing for us. And of course, Yom HaAtzmaut is coming up not long from now, Yom HaZikaron, and there are so many traditions that are about people gathering together. This must be an extraordinary time for Israel to try to cope with this. I guess both Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom HaZikaron must have happened before at scary times and difficult times for the nation. How do you think this is going to work? And I know one of the things we're going to try to do as a reform movement is to connect to communities in Israel on Yom HaAtzmaut so that we can use this technology to be able to see each other and be with each other. How do you think that's going to work this year?
Well, you are certainly within the confines of the Leigh Lippman family. That's my family. It's all very personal. And again, I haven't. I'll just say, within these sub-traditions of every tribe, so the tribe of the Anglo-Saxons, this is the gathering of the tribe, so the gathering of the clan. We as a family always get together with a whole group of friends who are from the UK or from, we all grew up together, including people who also grew up in what was then EDRS. And we do a barbecue and everything else together, but except they live in other parts of the country. And so the big trauma is, are we going to really be able to see ourselves? And there's one thing doing Seder on Zoom, but it's not, you can't do a barbecue on Zoom. It doesn't really work. I mean, even if you're a vegetarian such as I am, it ain't going to work. And but I think the difficult thing is that Yom Ha'atzmaut will be full of all those conflicting emotions, because it really is the country. The country literally goes out into the parks and the streets, and barbecues are happening on every street corner, and so I suspect, and I'll say, by the way, for my youngest daughter who's going into the army, well, she's going to a pre-army next year, but this is her last year of with all of her friends she's grown up with before they all go their separate ways, and the idea that she's not going to have Yom Ha'atzmaut with them is terrifying, and it's tragic. Now, there are worse things that people can go through, and she will cope with it as everyone copes with everything, but I think it's a thing. But I think it's interesting because just thinking through the timing of what's going on, there is some feeling that we're going to have, I mean, when we have the sirens for Yom HaShoah, for Holocaust Memorial Day, and the sirens for Fallen Soldiers Day, that we can do, we're always sort of slightly disparate from each other. But that, again, is one of those moments where you can have this virtual sense of togetherness. But Yom Ha'atzmaut really is the big going out. And one thing that's been assured is that the ceremony from Har Herzl, the lighting of the 12 torches, and all the kind of the whatever wonderful speeches that they're given every year, that will go ahead whether there's an audience there or not. But I think the leaders of the country and the planners, I think, are a little bit nervous, because this is probably the most public outdoors event since the last public outdoors event, which was probably led to quite a lot of the infections that we have, which was Purim. People, I think the line is that if we'd been closed down before Purim, particularly in the ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods, we'd have an even lower rate of infection than we have at the moment. So nobody wants to sort of let everybody out and then sort of we'll all go wild and do our celebration and so on, and then find that, of course, we went into a second wave and so on and so forth. So I think it's a little bit difficult. We've got 2 weeks between the end of, I mean, it's 2.5, just over, almost 3 weeks from now. So we have to wait and see. There is the beginning of a discussion of an exit strategy to get people out, but it's not the full-blown everybody out doing everything. It's kind of it's restarting the economy. So I don't really know. The only thing I will say is that I have a sense that the script is being written. It may not be the barbecues being prepared, but the script is being written, which is, I hope, will be a moment for national reflection. Independence Day is an opportunity to celebrate the fact you exist, but it's also very painful for Palestinians. I mean, again, we don't have to revisit all of our controversies and our wars of the past, but for Palestinians, this is a day of mourning, because it's when they lost, it's the Nakba, the catastrophe. When you wind the story on, many Arabs in Israel, of course, recognize that they are citizens and have learned to live with it and put it wherever they need to put it. But I think this year, the language of national celebration will be that we will be, I hope, one of national resilience, and that we manage to come through this process together. In other words, there's a date on the calendar which kind of leads us to ask the question, what does it mean to be a country? What's the purpose of independence? Do we stand up to the principles of the Declaration of Independence, look after each other? And I hope that everyone who should be listening hard will be listening hard, from the Prime Minister down. So we'll wait and see. In the meantime, we still have the rest of Pesach to get through, which is a small trauma. I haven't even mentioned the real trauma, aside from the virus, is the fact that there's a shortage of matzah, and there is a terrible shortage of eggs in the country. So I'm flying in respirators and testing kits. It's making sure there are enough eggs for people to be able to cook matzah brine and whatever else. That is no less kind of causing vexation, I think, amongst the good people of Israel.
Thank you, Jeremy. I really, really appreciate this 3 calls for an hour we've spent together. And it's lovely that there's been a large group of members of the shul with you, enjoying hearing you and enjoying feeling that we're with you in Israel in one way or another. Jeremy, I just wish you and your family, your wife and your 3 daughters very, very well, and hope that you'll all stay well and healthy. And I know that for us here back in Finchley, in Edgware, in Hendon, in Shenley, Radlett, Bournemouth, etc., you've given us a beautiful slice of Israel, a lot to think about. I want to say to you, Chag Sameach from all of us here, And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to Rabbi Emily for setting this up.
Can I add one last thing, if I may?
Of
Just
course.
because it's a very similar thing. For me, this is the one which I haven't spoken about, because you asked me to speak about the Israeli context, but there is this other piece which you've just spoken to so beautifully, and I want to add to it, which is, when in these situations, who do we reach out to and who do we feel connected to? And I think the sense of Jewish peoplehood and connectedness amongst Jews around the world works at certain moments as well. And clicking on Zoom the other night and seeing Seders going on all the way around the world, and feeling that in some way or another of the various communities that we're part of, we feel very, very connected to that. And much as we struggle to kind of do something with my mum in Stanmore, the feeling of I have to say, for me this morning, to be part of the shul that I grew up in is very powerful, very moving. So Mark, thank you very much, and thank you to Emily as well.
Thank you. Hag Sameach to you, Jeremy, and Hag Sameach to everybody who's watching this. And then this afternoon, if you've got somebody small with you, then it's Cuddle Up Pesach with the Shabbat dinosaur, who is enjoying Pesach at the moment and finding ways to eat matzah when you're definitely a carnivore as a dinosaur. And that's at 4:15. At 6:30 is our Friday night service, which you can find on the live stream, as well as the Cuddle Up Pesach. And then at 8 o'clock, if you want to join Rabbi Emily for Erev Shabbat Babayit, come and join her and her family again on Facebook Live for a chance to enjoy Shabbat songs and a bit of Oneg Shabbat. And then tomorrow morning, Chol HaMoed Shabbat service begins at 10:30 with Chol HaMoed Babayit with Rabbi Emily on Facebook Live. Our regular Chol HaMoed Pesach service is at 10:30 on the EHRS webpage, exactly where you're watching this. In the meantime, just wish you that you keep healthy, keep safe, and Chag Sameach, and see you soon. Goodbye now. We have to wait for just a minute or so for the live stream to catch up, Jeremy, because if I cut it now, the last 2 minutes disappears. And so we sit patiently looking zen for a couple of minutes and then we turn off. But thank you so much for being with me. Live stream to catch up, Jeremy, because if I cut it now, the last 2 minutes disappears. And so we sit patiently looking zen for a couple of minutes and then we turn off. Thank you so much. It looks now like the live stream's caught up, so I'm now going to turn off and say Chag Sameach to you and your family. See you soon. Bye. Oh, I'll just unmute you. Sorry.
No, thank you very much. I have to say this was